Welcome to Never Rewrite. I'm Isaac Askew, and today I'm joined by Dustin Rea. Jeffrey isn't here today, so it's me and Dustin today talking about some topics that we think are just either interesting or that we have something to say about, I guess. So one that we recently discussed an idea for was perfectionism in programming. It sounded like we both had some things to say about it. So Dustin, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So perfectionism in programming is something I've seen, I think, ruin certain projects. And
Hmm.
I've also seen where it can be a good thing if balanced with the right team. I think is kind of the takeaway that I have. One,
Okay.
I guess I'll start us out with like a horror story of like how this can go terribly, terribly wrong. And this can be done both on the engineering side or on like the founder side or the business side as well. This story is from the business side. But I think as engineers, we also have a responsibility to speak up and say, hey, I think we're kind of going in this direction. And I think at the time when I heard this story, I don't think I had the experience to know what to have done in this situation. But I worked with a client years and years ago that was essentially pre-revenue, like pre-customers, building out. I would say it was more advanced than an MVP. It's more like a
Mm-hmm.
V1. This customer had a lot of experience in the market, so they had a really good idea of like what the software needed to do. But that also meant that they had an idea of like how much it needed to do before they even launched, given like
Hmm.
other software in the market. And I think sometimes it can be kind of a mistake or like a foot gun where you're trying to compete with somebody that's already in the market, but you actually may want to take a different approach completely. And in this case, what ended up happening is this client essentially designed and iterated themselves like out of business before revenue came, because they
Hmm.
just kept iterating on the product indefinitely pre-launch with no feedback. They just felt like they kept, finding ways to improve it, and they felt like it had to essentially be better than all of the existing products in like every feature, right? And I think that's where, I think that's a fallacy.
It's interesting. I've never heard it phrased as iterating pre-release. Usually, when I think iterating, I'm thinking about iterating on something that is live.
Right,
So
right,
you're saying that they just wouldn't release the product until it was perfect. So they just kept
correct.
iterating on just the concept of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I've actually seen this more than once. After that time, I've been very keen to like spot it
Hmm.
and let clients know they're heading in that direction. Um, but yeah, I've seen it before as well, like with other clients. So yeah, it's something that I think is maybe more common than people would expect. I think especially if you're not coming from like a really software, like a technical background, like say
Hmm.
you have more of a business acumen or like a product background, you may not, I think you may not realize like the iteration, that there's value in the iteration, and that some people may even be willing to jump ship for like one specific workflow or one specific feature that you just do better than the bigger competitor who's now like more generalized. So I think that's like more early stage, but
Hmm.
I can also imagine that happening even at the multi-product platform level, right? So you have a product manager, you're launching a new product, and you can imagine just iterating on designs and concepts essentially
Yeah.
indefinitely until the point of the opportunity being passed you.
Yeah. I've actually run into this a few times, both in working for companies and working as a consultant. Um, Definitely, like you'll have a client that's thinks their idea is going to change the world, or that they are definitely got a new angle that no one's ever heard of,
Right.
and that it's such a crazy, awesome new angle that they have to keep quiet about it. And
Right. Right.
they can't let it,
Right.
people know because then somebody might copy them. But that's the thing. Like, if it's a good enough idea, someone's going to copy you anyway. There's no point in like keeping it secret.
Yeah.
And so I was talking to them about an MVP. I'm like, you should see if this is an idea that's actually worth exploring. If you're so confident about it, then just being first to market is not the thing that's going
Right.
to help you out with it. Like, again, there's so
Yeah.
many copycats that'll pop up the moment you have a good idea.
Yeah.
And it took we actually had an episode of this podcast where Jeffrey and I discussed MVPs and what an MVP
Hmm.
really was.
Hmm.
Um, because the idea is you're trying to literally get the minimum thing out there to
Right.
gauge viability, essentially. Because
Right.
if you build something people want or you think people want, and then nobody actually uses it after 2 years of planning and all this
Right.
acceptance criteria and building. You're quiet, you don't say anything, then you release and nobody uses it. You've just sunk a ton of cash.
Right.
So it's
Right.
way easier. And I've talked to at least one other person that actually did a similar concept, where they just like built their thing and didn't even have like automation. They just built like
Right. Right.
every response they would just manually respond to.
Yeah.
They would
The
just,
mechanical Turk strategy.
yeah,
Yeah.
to see if it was useful before they end up spending more money into it. And I
Right.
think that's the main thing is people are not willing to have like a cheap little version of their dream go out because it cheapens their dream.
Right.
This
Right.
is what I
Right. Right.
want. And it's going to be so perfect, but they just don't have the money for it because everyone's,
Yeah.
because it's a meme that someone's like, oh, I've got an app idea that would totally change.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, if I had $1 for every time I hear that, I'd already be rich. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I hear you. The other, I even have kind of a radical opinion about it. I was also
Mhm.
of the camp of like, hey, I think it's almost like an engineering's first instinct, right? Is like MVP. Let's build the minimum viable product. Like, let's reduce the risk.
Mhm.
And I think that is definitely a good approach. And I think there's even like a step zero though, is like that I really enjoy. I've been recommending it. I'm using it myself, is like building landing pages, right? And see if you
Yeah.
can you get the go to market motion correct enough that you can get people to join a waiting list or even like an email list where you're kind of hyping it up and delivering value at the same time. And I think that's a good form of market research. And if you can't get that moving, it's probably unlikely that your MVP is going to gain traction, also, so there's kind of a
Right.
two-step process there.
Yeah. One of the stories I was mentioning, actually, the guy's name is Darby Frey. He's like I don't know if he's still an engineering manager, if he's just a lead engineer now at GitLab. But we worked together at ActiveCampaign for a bit. And he had an idea along with a friend of his, that was essentially, whenever you fill out those one-on-ones,
Mm-hmm.
and they just had they were like randomly generated questions to get you
Right.
engaged with your manager to talk about stuff in one-on-ones. It was like questions for that. And he said, I wonder if anybody would actually care about that. So he did just what you were talking about. He built like a
Mm-hmm.
landing page and let people sign up for it and just go ahead and pay for it, like preemptively
Yeah.
pay for it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then when people asked for him, he actually typed out questions for people, you know. And there was a lot of people who had interest and actually were willing to give money before the product was built. And
Yeah.
then he realized, oh, okay, there's an idea here. And he ended up building a platform from it. I'm not going to throw the name out here for now. You can
Yeah.
research if you want. But he ended up building a platform from it with his friend. And that's how he started the product idea, with people already trying to give him money or already really interested in it.
Yeah.
Instead of the other route of, oh, I got this really great idea. I'm going to be
Right.
really quiet because it's such an incredible idea that nobody
Yeah.
would ever think about it but me. I'm so
Right.
great.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
No, I see that a lot. And I think, especially with like, I know AI is such a buzzword, but I was reading an article in even Forbes the other day about like the cost of software and the kind of commoditization of software because it's so much easier to write now. And I think like with that kind of happening, the cost is going down so much that like the technology is not your moat anymore, right?
Mm.
Like, anyone can quickly spin up kind of a proof of concept.
Yeah.
Um, the work is really in building the audience and building the user base and hearing what they want and then making the changes. And I wonder if we'll even see um, maybe even an era of like quote unquote sloppier software that's like maybe more hyper personalized, like driven
Mm.
towards specific purpose driven situations, as opposed to like what we build today with like kind of SaaS as a like software as a service, right? I wonder if we'll see kind of more of a company start to iterate on their own software and kind of build that discipline internally as well. And I think that all plays
Right.
into the same thing here is like even if you're using AI or whatever mechanism you're using to generate these products or tools, I think this concept applies the same way.
Yeah. If your mock up ideas are made easier to mock up and launch and get and gain interest on, I could see that being like a new era of more niche apps. Because I've
Mm-hmm.
definitely had a couple of app ideas that I just kind of worked on with friends. And we taught ourselves iOS that way we could like work on our first as a Swift, well, so we could work on our
Mm-hmm.
first iOS app. Um, and now I went there, I went to ChatGPT recently, and I was like, write me some code that would generate essentially what I had been building, and it did a pretty good job at it, and so I had to like tinker with it. But it was a good enough job that it got me a boilerplate. And I was like, oh, if I
Right.
had had this 2 years ago, we probably would have got started and momentum going a little earlier, even if it's not perfect.
Yeah.
It's exciting,
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
sense that I'll go to ChatGPT and like have it help me organize my notes. I'll just have like, can
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
put these in order of what you think makes sense priority wise, or whatever, and it'll give me a little template, and I'm like, oh, this is much nicer than my own little scribbles. So it's things
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that that kind of add up.
Yeah. The other thing that I think about too when talking about like perfectionism is, and I know we've dealt with this recently too, is, it's one thing to like iterate when you're trying to experiment and like validate ideas, but it's another thing when you have, which I think you were alluding to at the beginning, is like you have software in production,
Hmm.
and you have people using it, their businesses depend on it. The change management process of that kind of environment is a lot stricter. Um, how do you kind of navigate the production environment um, with this in mind, right? Like, there's certain kind of the way I'm thinking about it, as we've talked in the past, is there's certain workflows that once people are using them, they can essentially never break. So how do you kind of get the right level of iteration at maybe the feature and engineering level, ahead of those releases or those changes without kind of falling into the perfectionism trap and essentially never releasing?
What is this loop that you essentially can never get out of? Can you give me an example of what you're thinking?
Yeah, yeah, perfect. Yeah, example would be like, so for example, like your banking software, right? Like if your banking software makes a transaction or shows you the wrong, balance or certain things like that, that's going to be a major negative experience
Hmm.
versus something that's like, if um, the login button was a little misaligned with the left border, you're probably not going to get some churn over that, but so there's like certain features where it's like you don't want to be like iterating imperfectly on that flow. You want to be like,
Right.
maybe, I think what I'm getting at is maybe more intentional about those changes, um, but without getting into falling into like perfectionism where no, you
Gotcha.
can't
So you're
change it
essentially
ever.
asking where is that line,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because obviously for finances, I don't want my account balance to sometimes
Right.
be in a beta mode. that shows
Right.
me that shows me some new features. I want to always know my money. Like, I don't want any features around that.
Right.
So if somebody is redesigning part of that software for a calculation or for pulling something, and something goofs and suddenly my balance shows $0, that's not acceptable. That's going to scare the crap out of me. Like, where did my money
Right.
go? And then versus you know maybe stuff is in beta, like the login, like you were saying, with the button, the login page for Chase
Right.
is made simpler or
Right.
reorganized or whatever. Then some people go into it, get to one experience, some get to another, and maybe one of the experiences the button's goofed or something's bad. Then I'm like, oh, that looks tacky, but I can still log in and check my balance.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So I feel like it's a combination, or I guess like there's a hair splitting between like type of company you are, or software that you're building, like finance would obviously have stricter rules, and then the respectability of what you're trying to build. Like if you're
Hmm.
a bank, probably need to be super perfectionist, versus if you are some brand new company that's trying to change things, that offers a solution no one has seen and it's convenient, then maybe every now and then whenever they try to log in and it doesn't work, they're like, these guys are just a team of 4 people, and it's a free software, so I'm not super angry I can't log in right now. I know they're going to fix it on the back end. Versus that's a little more fleshed out product, and now I'm paying you $300 a month for it and it's not working.
Right.
So you've got, I feel like that perfectionism line just is going to depend on the severity of that. Like,
Right. Right.
yeah,
But I
is your
think it's
reputation on
not
the
just
line?
industry though, right? It's like from my experience at least, every software business, at least in the B2B space, has a flow that is like that. So
Mm-hmm.
usually, especially if it's e-commerce or anything like that, it's all obviously the checkout flow. But even in the SaaS world, right? Like think about like sign up and onboarding, or like if the sign up or onboarding flow is not working, which is something you would often iterate on because you want to make changes and experiment and
Mm-hmm.
improve it. But if that flow goes down, right, like you're losing revenue. So it's like things that can also, it's something you would want to experiment with because it has high ROI if you make the right changes. but it's
Hmm.
also high risk, right? Because it's such a friction point for new users.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the engineers on this, like, I still think it's kind of more of a conversation on what kind of thing you are delivering
Right.
versus almost engineer discontent and
Yeah.
versus like leadership discontent.
Yeah.
So, like an example, I was working on a product that sent text messages to people and is essentially for texting links to people to pay their bills virtually instead of waiting for a bill to come in the mail. It was essentially trying to
Hmm.
reduce the whole mailing thing, and we did an MVP for that. And because of that, we rushed this architecture because we were like, do people even want this? We're going to build it
Right.
cheaply with a few people. We're not going to do a ton of planning. We're going to let the customer tell us how to iterate on this, not what we think they want. So we did that. We built it lean. People loved it. So then when we were in this really unfortunate but fortunate space of now people really want it and we have a ton of people using it, and now we have to iterate on this in a way that doesn't start breaking
Right.
sending. Because at first they're like, oh, this is fine. Why is this? Why are you having problems sending now? And it's
Right.
because our solution was not meant to scale. It was like a
Right.
very quick MVP. So there was a lot of bumpy areas as we tried to transition and add like good, decent infrastructure to this. That from a professional aspect, that perfectionism needs to be there. If they're depending on us to deliver bills, then that's how they're getting money from people, and
Right.
people know
Right.
that money they owe money. That's a huge swap in their flow, and that needs perfection,
Hmm.
right? Or at least a way to correct quickly if texts fail to go out. At least we can try again in 2 hours and let them know we had a blip or something like that.
Right. Right. Right.
Um, so then that's a whole shift on our end because like our first philosophy was like this can be flaky, as long as
Right.
it serves enough to show that people want it. And that's a
Yeah.
complete paradigm shift now as a developer and a different personalities, which is something we've discussed on other episodes, where you might actually need three startup brained people. And
Right.
then once you're ready to do it the enterprise way, pull in enterprise level people who are really good with quality control, really good with,
Right. Right.
systems design. And now the startup people that started it maybe aren't the same people you want working on the enterprise version of it because it's just different
Right.
personalities.
Right. Well, I think there's a lot of lessons I've seen too from like almost failure from success, right? Like it's kind of like what you're, that's kind of how I frame it. It's
Mm-hmm.
almost, it's not like a failure, but it's like you kind of have this like bumpy event where like you kind of have this scaling event and like you weren't prepared for it. It's a good, like you
Right.
said, it's a good thing, but it's a bad thing because it's like it's a weird reputation paradigm. Um, have you learned any lessons? I think from that launch that you would maybe use in the future to kind of mitigate that? Like you still want to have the success, but how could you
Yeah.
mitigate the negativity, the fallout?
Well, I'll talk through some lessons I learned. Some might not be relevant to this episode, but maybe in talking through them out loud, we'll learn something. um, One of the lessons I think that we learned from that product in particular was there is a point in which you stop saying yes to the
Right.
customer because we built something they really enjoyed, and then, well, can it do this? Can it do that? Can we do that? And we were so excited to have a market fit essentially that we were like, yeah,
Right.
we can do that. We can do that. We can do that. And then after a while, we were doing a lot of mixtures of Mechanical Turk and
Hmm.
SMS sending, where there was some like bills they wanted to send us, and we had to find different ways to parse those bills, or maybe just temporarily send them in our own format, or just find some kind of creative ways to say yes to the customer. Can you support A/B testing or A/B
Right.
different text flows? Different languages in your flows. Yes, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. And so after a while, the team got overwhelmed with both trying to deliver these feature requests and to try to refactor the system into one that was more sustainable and it could scale with the customers. So that was
Hmm.
kind of the first issue was our resources got split. And trying to both refactor and move things to this new system that's scalable and deliver features in the old system means sometimes
Hmm.
duplicative work.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
your resources get further split from feature development, double feature development in the new system, and then bug fixes and maintenance from the old system,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. The only other guard I've seen be somewhat effective is like it's just the standard engineering put a bound on it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
if you can if you kind of know what your upper limit is, then you can kind of start to have a bounds on maybe the user count or something like that. And it's like, then if you hit that ceiling, okay, we've got something here. Let's close the
Yeah.
doors and figure out how to support this and kind of roll it out. That would be kind of how I would think about it. But again, sometimes it's like a rocket ship. You just have to, be along for the ride.
Well, on the perfectionism topic, there's actually none that I'm saying it out loud. Interestingly, we did have this kind of split in the developers working on it, and some
Mm,
were discontent about the way in which we were refactoring it and scaling it, essentially,
mm,
because we had a few different ways to scale the system. They wanted to do it one way, which was more sustainable but took longer,
yeah,
and the product team wanted it to work for the new customers. And so there was still more cut corners, and we delivered another imperfect software that solved the problem a little better, but wasn't like the interim solution. And that
right,
actually, because we knew it was still a stopgap,
yeah,
some engineers lost a bit of morale on that, and they didn't want to
mm,
rework it again.
mm,
And I think that's where the perfectionism thing comes in, because there's a point where, like, as an engineer, you think we should be doing this a better way than I have to do this right now because my hand is literally just forced by money.
right, right,
Um, and that's both a thing that helps you. I mean, like, you're getting money, and so, like, I guess as an engineer, you have to be okay
right,
with a compromise, a half
yeah,
solution. Even as you continue, even after you're like, okay, I'm going to write the real version of this now, or V1. There's still V1. There's still V2. There's still
right,
V3 coming
right,
up.
right,
Um, it'll never be perfect at the end, so don't try to jump three different versions. So you
right,
still want to solve the problem at hand, and that's a tricky one because you're like, oh, cool, finally we get to do it the right way. No, you
yeah,
don't. You're still limited by customer complaints, constraints,
right,
resource constraints. What if you have layoffs?
right,
Like,
right.
then
Economic
your
shifts.
teams have to. Like, there's plenty more there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I've experienced that as well. How would you approach handling like those team dynamics? Like, how do you kind of get your engineers like back in the game?
That depends on the personality of the engineer.
Yeah,
100%. Um, I think putting on a little manager hat for a moment, even though I've never been a manager, just a team lead, I guess.
yeah,
Um, I think the best way to do that is just to have a conversation with your team. If everyone understands why you're making those changes and why you've made those decisions, the pill is a bit easier to swallow.
right,
If you just join a meeting and everyone says, we have to deliver this, it needs to be done in 2 weeks, you're like, well, wait, what's the deal? Why am I building this? Why
right,
does it have to be
right,
2 weeks? Because there's not nearly enough time to do this in 2 weeks.
right.
That's going to cause discontent. But and we ended up doing this, which I thought was a really illuminating idea, is we'd put engineers on the customer support calls. And so we
Mm,
got to hear firsthand, like, the
hmm.
engineer wouldn't say anything. They don't have
Right,
to.
right, right.
The product, customer facing product teams and anybody else, sales or whatever, would be on the call too. And the engineer would just be listening to all the complaints. And
Yeah,
they were like, well, look, I'm going to go somewhere else if this isn't added soon because we need this to be working by this particular date. You
right.
guys sold me and said you had the solution. It's
Yep.
not ready yet. And then the engineers goes, okay, I feel that pressure now. And now
Right,
I
right.
understand why the rush. Because I
Yeah,
think if you have a complete compartmentalization of the engineer from, oh, they never get to hear the customer complaints, then they also don't
yeah.
feel the pressure of why
Right.
we're having to make these half
It's
solutions.
just tickets on a board. Right.
Right. And so
Yeah.
that pressure paints a lot of context. And I think if you either pull them in and let them see that context firsthand from the customer, or you pull them aside and say, hey, and just essentially funnel that same information to them and let them know why. And be
Yeah.
like, we like your work. I know you hate coding this way. I know you want to do it the right way, but right now we don't have those constraints. And if we did it the way you wanted it to do, by the time you delivered the way that you're saying you want to deliver it, we might not even have those customers anymore and might have to kill
Right.
the product. And if
Right.
you frame it that way, so like the product will die if you try to make it perfect, and then we won't have any money. That generally, maybe don't phrase it so dramatically, but that that helps paint the conversation a bit more than
Yeah.
just like, no, John, you have to code really crappy stuff and you just have to get
Yeah.
over it.
Yeah, it's about building buy-in and like
Hmm.
building some empathy, for the
Yeah.
like, for the engineer to have empathy for the customer and the end user. So
Yes.
yeah, 100% agree. 100% would agree on getting engineers in customer calls, even if they're not complaints. Just hear how they use the software, especially like watching
Right.
them use it. Like it's eye-opening watching end users use the software, and on both
Hmm.
ends of the spectrum, both like the users that are struggling and both your power users. Like I always find it fascinating to see how like power users use the software. But yeah, highly recommend jumping on customer calls.
You've reminded me something of something that Sentry has. If you have the like the front end flows installed for Sentry, where you can see what the user is doing from like the
Yeah,
DOM perspective, there's an area that'll report rage click.
yeah,
And if
yeah,
you
yeah.
click back through and watch it again, you'll see like they clicked a button and maybe it didn't load, or the back
Right.
end was churning and didn't respond, and there was no feedback. And so
Yeah,
you see them spam the button a few times, and now Sentry understands, oh, this is a rage click, and they'll actually report on
yeah.
those. And those are also kind of fun experiences when you actually see slower users. If you're the power user because you built it and you're like click 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 click, yeah, this
Right.
works fine, versus somebody who's like going real slow, is confused about the software. You put them yourself in their shoes. That will help you have a lot more customer empathy for sure.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, all right. Are there any other comments on perfectionism before we wrap up today's episode?
That's it on my end. It's a good
All
convo.
right. So, Dustin, if there's, we've asked this usually on each time, but if there's anybody here that wants to get in contact with you, or any organization you want to throw your support behind,
Yeah,
this is your time.
yeah. Feel free to reach out at redhook.agency. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks for listening. I'm Isaac Askew, and this is Never Rewrite.